"Don't get on that plane," yells a black boy to a millionaire, and something astonishing happens. It was late afternoon when Elliot Graves' private jet, gleaming like a blade, was towed into the executive hangar at Los Angeles Airport. The magnate kept his eyes glued to his phone, deleting emails, adjusting orders. 2 bodyguards formed a wall behind him. Ahead, the pilot waited at the top of the stairs, flashing a showroom smile. Elliot hated smiles like that, but time was always racing. A warm breeze carried the heavy scent of kerosene. Elliot motioned for someone to carry his leather briefcase and climbed the first step, his finger anxiously reaching for the button to mute the world. Then it happened. A scream tore through the tarmac, and for a second that felt like centuries, it shook Elliot's confidence. "Mr. Graves, don't get on that plane." He turned, ready to have the intruder dragged away. He saw a young black boy, thin, a loose T-shirt clinging to his sweaty chest, sneakers far too big. The boy had slipped through the service fence and was running toward Gate 4, dodging horns and flashing warning lights. He was panting as if the air burned his lungs, but he kept shouting, "I dreamed of fire. I saw you die." The bodyguards reached him before he could touch the stairs. The boy didn't resist. He only tried to catch Elliot's gaze. There was something fierce and pleading in those eyes, and the ground seemed to shift beneath the magnate's polished shoes. A gust tousled his hair and pushed dense clouds over the field. The afternoon lost its color with unnatural speed, like someone turning a giant dimmer. A sweet, almost metallic scent slipped beneath the kerosene, a distant memory of childhood mixed with fire. The pilot cleared his throat. "Sir, there's a forecast of severe turbulence along the route. We could delay by a few minutes." Minutes. The word struck in sync with his racing pulse. It wasn't belief in the supernatural. It was pragmatism. If there's even a 1% risk, what's the cost of waiting? Elliot stepped down 2 steps, feeling his shirt cling to his back. He looked at the boy, now kneeling, his face pressed to the hot concrete. The boy looked up and, for the first time, smiled, exhausted, certain he had fulfilled his mission. "Cancel the takeoff," Elliot ordered, clutching the briefcase to his chest, surprise and irritation battling on his lips. The crew froze, then began the choreography of undoing the boarding process. Engines off, the high-pitched whine ceased, and a heavy silence filled the hangar. Elliot realized he was breathing too fast. The runway lights blinked red warnings into the twilight. Next to the grounded jet, the boy remained still, only watching, like someone storing the scene deep in memory. He had come alone, uninvited and without a future, and yet had rerouted the destiny of a man used to steer in the lives of thousands. Elliot Graves, heir to his own ego, didn't know it yet, but he had just taken the first step onto a path no flight plan would ever dare chart. The flight wasn't trivial. In Seattle, he was set to announce an autonomous drone project expected to double the company's market value. Another rung on the ladder, more headlines. But the boy's cry reduced it all to dust. Micah, a name Elliot would only learn later, had scraped knees and a tattered shirt, marks of someone who lived in worlds a magnate had never stepped into. Yet his words had pierced through the roar of turbines and torn the cocoon of cynicism Elliot had been weaving for decades. That afternoon, power changed hands without a single contract signed. All it took was a warning. All it took was believing that life could be worth more than a perfect schedule. In a fraction of a second, Elliot recalled the stories his grandmother used to tell back in Alabama about omens and anonymous angels. He had always laughed at them. Now, though, the vertigo was real, as if the fables had crossed decades to settle a score with him. Agreeing not to fly meant admitting something was beyond his control. And perhaps, deep down, that was exactly what he needed. The clock read 9:17 p.m. when the penthouse apartment on the 58th floor of the Prism Tower lit up with a bluish flash. The television had turned on by itself, triggered by the automation system that displayed headlines relevant to the name Elliot Graves. He had just stepped out of the shower, still drying his hair in a sticky silence. Breaking news: private jet crashes off California coast. Authorities confirm. The aircraft is the same Gulfstream G700, scheduled for departure at 5:10 p.m. from Los Angeles Executive Airport. The caption was cold, but the anchor was trembling. On the side of the screen, a radar map appeared. A red blinked, then vanished into nothing. Elliot's legs buckled, as if the floor had turned to water. He sat down, still wrapped in a towel, pupils dilated to the point of pain. Aerial footage showed wreckage burning on the black surface of the Pacific. Rescue lights formed small halos of fury, reflected in the waves. Though the image was slightly blurry, Elliot recognized the color scheme of his company's logo on the fuselage, now floating upside down. He was supposed to be in there, now evaporated into glowing fragments, the news of his own demise. The anchorwoman continued, her voice swallowing sobs. Initial sources suggest an electrical failure linked to the ignition system. Investigators point to reports of a possible medical irregularity involving the pilot. Preliminary tests show traces of amphetamines. That word struck him like a splinter. Amphetamines. Years earlier, Elliot had vetoed surprise toxicology tests to cut costs and appease private pilot unions. Trust is cheaper than paranoia. He'd laughed during a board meeting. Now that phrase buzzed in his brain like a swarm of wasps. The towel slipped off. He didn't even notice. He picked up his phone. 68 notifications. A flood of messages from executives, distant relatives, his ex-wife and Tomei, and hungry reporters. He let the phone fall onto the carpet. On the TV screen appeared the pilot's face. Kyle Dorsey, 34, former war hero. Elliot remembered the firm handshake, the perfect smile, and the spasm of empathy he'd felt upon learning of Kyle's medical debt for his sick sister. He considered paying it off discreetly, but never followed through. Now the man was bluish-gray in the nighttime search images, lifeless, pulled by paramedics. Elliot staggered to his feet, the city lights warping beyond the glass, as if he could see the ocean from there. His reflection stared back pale, water trailing from his temples. He slid open the glass door to the balcony, facing the salty wind rising from the coast. Down below, ambulances moved like shiny miniatures. He gripped the railing until his knuckles went white. Micah. The name took form in the vacuum of his chest. The boy hadn't shouted, "Cancel the flight," or asked for charity. He had said, "Don't die," translating his silence. Elliot felt something quake near his ribs, where he kept all the memories he didn't want to keep. The phone rang again, insistent. It was Harper, head of crisis communications. He answered without saying hello. "This is already all over the networks," the metallic voice blurted. "We need an official statement in the next 30 minutes. The FAA wants to talk. Lawyers advise you to admit nothing." Elliot stared at the glowing rectangle in his hand, realizing the person on the other end was speaking from a parallel universe, one in which he was still alive, and thus still bound by duty. "Harper," he said, his own voice sounding alien, "contact the crew's families, double the relief fund. Funerals, everything. I don't care about the cost." "Of course, sir. And the press?" "Say I deeply regret what happened. This isn't an investor update. It's real life." He hung up before corporate jargon could creep back in. He returned to the living room. The TV now showed anonymous interviewees. "I saw fireballs in the sky. Thought it was a meteor." The headline rolled across the bottom. "Businessman cancels flight last minute. Was not on board." Social media boiled with theories. Some called him a prophet of bad luck. Others, a genius who sabotaged his own jet to cash in on insurance. But no speculation was crueler than the private certainty that if not for a boy he didn't know, he would now be white noise on the evening broadcast. Instinctively, Elliot opened the leather briefcase he'd left on the sofa. Acquisition documents, a drone prototype, the Seattle speech printed on linen paper. Everything smelled of fresh ink and stale ambition. He tore the first page, then another, until the text dissolved into a pile of fibers on the floor. Each tear made a dry snap that echoed in the ceiling like muffled gunfire. Suddenly, the intercom buzzed. The doorman announced the presence of the private investigator hired hours earlier to find Micah. "Is he here?" Elliot asked, in a whisper he barely recognized. "No, sir. But I think I found a shelter where he sleeps sometimes. Midtown Shelter, corner 12th and Hoover. Terrible conditions." Elliot felt the weight of water on his temples again, not from the shower, but from the ocean that had swallowed the jet. "Tomorrow at 6, we leave. Bring masks, shots, whatever's needed. I want to speak to him before the world eats him alive. He hung up. On the news, the images repeated the plane's fractured flash against the night. He reached for the speaker on the shelf and pressed play. Bach, BWV 639. It's Rough Zu DR, her Jesu Christ. The slow melody filled the room like candles in an empty cathedral. It was his grandmother's favorite. The same played at her funeral, and it always felt like a lament for things no one could ever fix. He closed his eyes and saw tall flames, not from the sea, but from the child's mural on the wall of the abandoned shelter. A man in a suit, surrounded by fire, holding a check larger than his own heart. Beside him, fine lines of children running in circles, arms raised, calling for help that never came. When he opened his eyes, the music still hovered, but something inside had settled into a new, uncomfortable position, a vast question about the worth of his own existence. Everything he had built could vanish in 15 seconds of sparks and fuel. Everything he neglected could return in a boy's scream, strangling the roar of turbines. Elliot raised a remote. Instead of turning off the news, he turned up the volume. He needed to hear every detail, every accusing syllable, until the guild had weight and shape enough to drive him out the door at first light. Outside, helicopters carved the sky like metal insects. Inside, his heart pounded in his chest like war drums. Not only mourning the dead, but heralding the unavoidable march toward the outskirts of a life he once believed to be untouchable. The boy from Gate 4 had said he saw fire. Elliot now understood. The blaze hadn't ended, not on the wreckage still burning far away, but in the core of everything he'd ever taken as truth. And there was only one way to put out. Find Micah, hear his story, and maybe, finally, learn how to dream differently. The sun hadn't yet kissed the city's mirrored windows when Elliot Graves descended to the building's garage, dressed in dark jeans, a light jacket, and an unmarked cap that concealed his well-known face. In the elevator, the mirror revealed raw under-eye circles, a brutal contrast to the flawless glow he was used to. Behind the wheel of his own sedan, he dismissed the driver. He needed to feel the asphalt rumbling beneath the tires, as if the friction could keep him awake after a sleepless night. The address the detective had given him, Midtown Shelter, 12th and Hoover, was in an urban pocket the city hall only mentioned in statistical reports: poverty, drug traffic, frequent fires. Elliot had never set foot there. The GPS route crossed avenues where billboards bore his face promoting clean technologies, then plunged into streets corroded by graffiti, makeshift power lines, and windows boarded with cardboard. He stopped in front of a crumbling brick building, 2 stories high, iron gates stiffened by rust. The half-hanging sign still read, Hope House. The irony pulsed. House of Hope. The air smelled of grease, fresh spray paint, and rotten nostalgia. The detective, a short man with a neutral expression, waited leaning against a lamppost. He greeted Elliot with a subtle nod. We're early. The caretaker usually shows up at 8, he said. But I found someone willing to talk. Wait here. They entered through a side gate, the metal groaning. The dark hallway led to a deactivated cafeteria. Long Formica tables, chairs stacked like bones. On the ceiling, immobile fans gathered cobwebs. A gray-haired woman in a worn coat sat in the back, lit by the oblique light of a broken window. When she stood, Elliot noticed her limp, a metal prosthesis at the knee. Mr. Graves, she said without reverence. I'm Margaret Finn, former coordinator of this shelter. I only agreed to talk because Micah trusts me, and he said you needed to listen. I don't know if you deserve it, but we'll see. The sharp honesty cut like a blade, but Elliot nodded. Margaret led them down a side corridor. The floor creaked under timid rat steps. They stopped in front of a tiny room with a broken bunk bed and graffiti-covered walls, filled with children's dreams. He used to sleep here until 2 weeks ago, she said. After the plumbing burst, no one stayed. The city assistants promised funds. They vanished. The boy moved to the streets. Elliot ran his hand over the bed's cold metal frame. He imagined Micah curled up there, hearing sirens in the distance, clinging to the newspaper clipping that had saved him. The detective took pictures. Elliot didn't want any records. He needed a living memory, not a digital archive. They descended into a wing destroyed by an old fire, charred plaster, soot that had never been cleaned. There, Margaret stopped in front of a still blackened wall. Painted in school paint was a mural. Children holding hands, and in the center, a tall man in a blue suit holding an enormous check. The face was cartoonish, but Elliot recognized himself instantly. Beneath the drawing, a shaky caption read, "The man who promised T.O. save U.S." His heart pounded in his chest like a private siren. I didn't know they kept this painting," he murmured. "The kids painted it on the day of the donation. It was a party, a week of smiles." Then the cut started again. The money patched holes, then raised walls. Elliot swallowed hard. The sound of an old engine broke in from outside. Margaret pointed a window. A white van came down the street, carrying sacks of bread from the local parish. On a back seat, huddled among boxes, appeared a small figure with sharp eyes. The faded yellow cap was unmistakable. Micah. Elliot ran out the door before reason could leap the wall of fear. The detective followed. The van stopped to unload supplies. Children emerged like hungry sparrows. Micah jumped out and spotted Elliot approaching. His dark eyes shone, first with panic, then with the streetwise caution of a stray. "Don't be afraid," Elliot said, panting. "I just want to say thank you." Micah clutched the cap to his chest, like a shield. "I saw you on TV," he said, voice thin but firm. "They say you were supposed to die. I felt like I couldn't let that happen." Elliot knelt to match his height, fine trousers standing on the asphalt. The gesture, unthinkable just 48 hours earlier, came naturally. "Why? I was just a stranger." Micah looked inward, as if hearing a distant choir. "When my mom disappeared, I was alone here. I used to dream that the man with the check would come back." He reached into his pocket, pulling out the laminated newspaper clipping. "I keep this because it reminds me that promises sometimes return." The sight of that wrinkled clipping imploded Elliot's chest. The flash of the photo, him smiling next to a director whose name he'd forgotten, brought him face to face with the abyss between marketing and mercy. "Can I offer you something? Food? A doctor?" Micah hesitated, then nodded, pulled by a hunger no armor could fully suppress. Elliot stood up, placed a hand on the boy's fragile shoulder. In that touch pulsed the ignition of a new destiny, not powered by turbines, but by the resonance of two lives that, for a moment, shared the same breath of urgency. A child's shout pulled their attention. One of the shelter boys raised a loaf of bread like a trophy. Another took photos with a broken cell phone. Margaret handed out bags, but her steady gaze landed on Elliot, a silent charge. "If you're taking the boy, come back for the others," she said. He replied with an almost imperceptible nod that promised more than words could hold at that moment. The sedan drove off slowly, Mike in the passenger seat, eyes wide at the skyscrapers slicing clouds to the north. In the rear-view mirror, the scorched walls of Hope House shrank, but the mural of the man with the check seemed to follow them, tattooed on both their retinas. Elliot gripped the wheel, feeling an unexpected sprout of responsibility germinating in the leather's weaves. Each kilometer took them away from ruin, but etched a new question into the silence between them. How far must you go to finally fulfill forgotten promise? The radio announced the official start of the jet crash investigation. Experts suspected systemic negligence. Elliot turned the knob and shut it off. The public narrative that had consumed his career no longer mattered on that road. What mattered was the boy, the dream of fire, and the new flame he now had to learn to keep alive. Not to burn, but to illuminate. There, at the crossroads where the city swapped one backdrop of vices for another, Elliot understood he hadn't come to save Micah. He had come to learn how to save himself. And the first lesson began with a child's voice pointing toward a path that had never appeared on his investment maps. The way back to the human he once promised to be. Elliot Graves' apartment had never been designed to echo with the sounds of a child's voice. It was a sleek penthouse with panoramic views, where silence was part of the contract. But that morning, the sound of a spoon clinking against the bottom of a cereal bowl filled the space with something Elliot hadn't heard in a long time. Life. Micah, now clean, wore an oversized T-shirt that reached his knees. He still clung to the yellow cap, never letting it go, not even during his bath. He sat on a tall stool in the kitchen, observing the stainless steel appliances like they were machines from another planet. "Do you have robots?" he asked softly. "Just a coffee maker that makes weird noises," Elliot replied, sitting on the other side of the counter. Micah smiled, small, shy, but genuine. Elliot made a mental note. That smile was worth more than any social impact metric. On the TV, breaking news flashed in red letters. Preliminary investigation confirms Graves' jet pilot was under the influence. Disaster avoided by mere minutes. Elliot stood up and turned the TV off. It wasn't the time. Not with the boy there. Not when the world finally seemed a little more human. But inside, something burned. Who was that pilot? Why did he lie? Who else knew? That doubt now breathed down his neck, like another invisible jet was still about to crash. Only this time, he was awake and on board. Later, Elliot took Micah to a private clinic. Tests, pediatric evaluations. Even child psychologists were on standby. But the boy, scared by white coats and probing questions, clung to Elliot's sleeve like a castaway. "I'm not sick," he said. "I just dream weird stuff." "That's not wrong, is it?" Elliot knelt in front of him. What's wrong is the world not knowing how to listen. He let Micah choose. They went back home, no pressure. The boy was more than a patient, more than a case file. He was someone who unintentionally had touched a raw nerve in Elliot's life and forced him to wake up. That night, Elliot couldn't sleep. He stood on the balcony, staring at the city lights with a full glass of untouched whiskey in hand. The phone rang. It was his legal advisor. "We need to issue an official statement. If it comes from you, the narrative will feel more human. The media's already calling the boy a street angel." Elliot looked inside the apartment, where Micah was curled up asleep on the couch. The TV was off, but he held the remote like he controlled a world of his own. "I don't want to use him as a shield," Elliot said, firmly. "Not anymore. But your image..." "My image didn't die when that plane nearly crashed. It died the day I gave that check and never went back. This kid is reminding me of that. I need to do something real, even if it never makes a headline." The lawyer sighed. "So, what do you intend to do?" Elliot didn't answer, but he already knew, and it led him back to a place he had sworn never to revisit, his late sister's room. The next day, he visited her childhood bedroom, now empty since she had passed from an overdose. On the wall, there was still a crayon drawing of the two of them, Elliot in a superhero cape, his sister holding flowers. There, Elliot remembered, his sister also had weird dreams. She talked about things no one understood. She was ridiculed, over-medicated, and then forgotten by the system. Micah was just like her. And this time, he wouldn't let the world extinguish that spark. That week, Elliot made calls to former partners, architects, business people, and social workers. Many declined, skeptical, thinking it was another PR stunt. But a small group agreed to listen. "I want to buy the land where the old Hope House stood," he said in a private meeting. "Not to renovate, to rebuild. And I want to put this boy at the center of it all." "What do you mean?" one investor asked. He saw what no one else saw. "He saved my life because he believed in a dream. The new Hope House will be a center for children the system ignores. Those who dream too much, talk too much, feel too much, or simply don't fit in. It'll be a place where their madness gets heard." "That's risky," another murmured. Elliot smiled. "Not as risky as getting on a plane with a drug pilot. I'm living proof of that." By the end of the act, he takes Micah to the construction site of the future foundation. There's still rubble, dust, half-finished walls. But there's also light at the end of the street, smiling workers and a temporary sign. Hope House, rebuilding with those who still see what the world ignores. Micah stared at it in silence, then whispered, "So, I'll live here again." Elliot replied, voice choked, "No, you'll help build it." And deep down, they both knew the real rebuilding was happening right there, between two hearts that, before the plane crash, would have never crossed paths. But now they were flying, together. The news broke like thunder held back for too long. Elliot Graves rebuilds Hope House, inspired by the boy who saved him. News websites, social media profiles, even printed newspapers gave space to new Elliot, a man once labeled an emotional mechanic, a soulless CEO, someone whose fortune was built behind glass walls and locked doors. Now he appeared in photos smiling, sleeves rolled up alongside construction workers, psychologists, and, most importantly, alongside Micah. But Micah himself remained quiet, as if fame made him shrink smaller than the street outside. In Elliot's makeshift office at the Hope House construction site, boxes piled up, filled with donated toys, computers, and colorful books. Elliot was reviewing the building plan with the architect when the door creaked open. It was Micah, wearing for the first time a new, clean T-shirt with the institution's logo, a boy in a yellow hat looking at the sky, with stars flowing out his head. "Is the drawing okay?" he asked shyly, holding up a piece of paper he had sketched himself, trees, plants, and even a slide on the rooftop. Elliot smiled and motioned for the architect to look. "I'd say it's better than the original." She winked at the boy. "Chief engineer. I'll put your name on the blueprint." Micah let out a shy laugh, and for the first time, Elliot realized there was more in that boy than just fear. But that night, the shadows returned. Micah woke up screaming. A nightmare. Elliot rushed to the couch where the boy slept. He was trembling, sweaty, eyes wide with fear. "It was the fire," he murmured. "I saw it all again. I saw you inside, locked in, dying." "Micah." Elliot knelt down, trying to calm him. "It was just a dream. I'm here. I'm okay. You saved me." But Micah shook his head. "It wasn't just a dream. I saw it before. When I was sleeping on the station bench, I saw everything. I saw the plane, the fire, the gas. I saw it all like it was real." Elliot swallowed hard. The boy was trembling not just from fear, but guilt. "I thought I was going crazy again. That's why I ran to the airport. If I didn't say anything, you were going to die. Like my uncle, like my mom." The pieces started fitting together, fragments of an emotional puzzle falling into place. The next day, Elliot took Micah to a specialist in neurodivergence and rare sensory perception. He wasn't looking for a label. He just wanted to understand. The boy spent hours in playful assessments and creative evaluations. When they got back to the car, Micah held a name tag that read, "I think differently. That's a superpower." Elliot placed the tag in the glove box. He still didn't know what to think, but he knew he couldn't and didn't want to hand the boy back to the system. That night, Elliot did something he hadn't done in years. He sat on the living room floor with Micah, a checkerboard between them, dim lighting, pizza on their laps. Micah still ate slowly, as if expecting to be sent away at any moment. Elliot silently handed him a brown envelope. "This belonged to my sister," he said. "She saw things too. We thought it was just too much imagination, but maybe she just didn't have anyone to listen." Micah opened the envelope carefully. Inside were old drawings, similar to the ones he made. One showed two boys holding hands on top of a building, wings on their backs. "She drew stuff like this too?" he asked. "All the time. She once said, 'Some people are born with taller antennas.' I never really understood until now." Micah looked down. "I don't want to be weird. I just want a house, and a bed, and someone to stay." Elliot took a deep breath, the kind a man takes after a lifetime of running from connection. But here, in front of this boy, he realized he had nowhere left to run. "Micah," he said, voice steady, without a hint of empty promise. "You're not weird, and I'm not going anywhere." In the days that followed, the letters began to arrive. Hundreds, from children, teenagers, parents, caregivers. Some wrote, "My kid sees things too." Others, "I was like Micah." And one, written in shaky handwriting, "Thank you for not silencing his voice, because that voice sounds like mine." Elliot decided he would no longer give interviews. He wouldn't turn Micah into a martyr or a poster child. But one thing he did decide: he would give a speech at the new Hope House inauguration. Just one, the last one, and he wouldn't be the only one speaking. Micah would have a microphone too. The voice the world tried to silence would now be heard, not as a desperate warning at an airport, but as a call to listen, an invitation to hope. And the boy in the yellow hat was now more than a symbol. He was a seed of Elliot's reconstruction, of the city's, of everyone who still believed that dreams, even the frightening ones, could be guides. The sun that morning felt different, as if the entire city was holding its breath, waiting for a moment that could change everything. The new Hope House was ready to open its doors for the first time, and the air was thick with anticipation, nerves, and hope. Elliot Graves had arrived early. Dressed in a light blue shirt and dress pants, he walked through the freshly painted halls, taking in the details, the scent of fresh paint, the shine of the large windows letting in the sky. Micah was by his side, clutching the yellow hat, now clean and slightly worn by time, like a trophy of battles won. In the improvised auditorium, a crowd had already gathered. Curious children, volunteers, journalists, investors, and neighborhood residents. All eyes were fixed on the main stage, where a red ribbon awaited the ceremonial cut. Elliot felt the weight of that attention, but when he looked at Micah, he saw the same anxiety, mixed with a quiet kind of courage. He knew that this boy, so young, carried a voice that could not be silenced. When the microphone was finally turned on, Elliot began. When a man like me nearly loses everything because of a drug pilot, it's easy to think that luck is just random chance. But luck, I've learned, is something we carry within, an invisible thread, a hand reaching out in the dark. He paused, and all eyes turned to Micah, who slowly climbed onto the stage, still gripping the hat tightly in his hands. Silence fell completely. Micah took a deep breath and said, in a voice that trembled but did not waver, I didn't know if anyone would believe me. I just knew I had to warn someone. Because when you feel danger coming, you can't pretend you didn't see it. Some in the crowd were moved to tears. Others sat in awe, recognizing the depth of that moment. Micah continued, I used to think being different was a problem, that dreaming too much was a bad thing. But now I know being different can save lives. That listening to the voices the world calls crazy is what makes us human. After the speech, spontaneous conversations began to bloom. Children who also felt the world deeply found space to share their own weird dreams. Parents began to cry, finally understanding their children. Elliot stood a little apart, watching the transformation that this house was already bringing about. That's when an elderly woman, with a serene gaze and a gentle smile, approached. Elliot Graves, she said, extending her hand. I was the director of the Old Hope House orphanage. I never had the courage to reach out after your donation, but today, seeing what you've done, I understand the past can be repaired. He shook her hand, sensing that this was more than a second chance for the children. It was a fresh start for himself. When the ceremony ended, Elliot and Micah stepped out onto the Hope House balcony. Below, the city looked like a mosaic of intertwined lives, each with its own story. Micah looked up at the sky and, for the first time, removed his yellow hat. Do you really think we can change the world? He asked, half doubting. Elliot smiled, looking at the boy who had changed everything. I know we can, because change begins with those who have the courage to listen and act. They stood there side by side, two worlds that were never meant to meet, now bound by hope and by a promise fulfilled. To never again ignore the voices that come as warnings, not even the ones that, at first glance, seem like nothing more than weird dreams.